Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. I'm your host, Jack Foster, joined alongside Ryan Schumpert and Ric Butler, as always, here on this Thursday, October 24th edition, coming at you a little bit later in the week, as it is a bye week, so there's no game to preview. We're just going to do some final recap of the Alabama game, a couple of the biggest storylines we thought coming out of Tennessee's massive win over the Tide in the third Saturday of October, and looking forward to the rest of the schedule. Looks pretty gettable for Tennessee, of course, outside of one game, but a lot to get to today. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back on here. And I thought the open date was going to be, a little more restful, but full speed ahead. Plenty of football stuff. Chris Stewart giving us a lot of content. Basketball exhibition this weekend, and Tennessee fall baseball. So a lot of stuff in the Tennessee sports world going on.
Rick, how's it going on your end, man?
Yeah, everything is good over here. It's funny. Ryan hit the nail on the head. It's weird. We're not only in crossover season right now with basketball and football, but you're almost in a little bit of a triple crossover season right now with a lot of baseball mixed in as well. Ryan, I know you've been practically camping out at Lindsey Nelson Stadium, or at least what remains of Lindsey Nelson Stadium right now, as so many renovations happen. But I know you've been there constantly over the last 2 weeks or so. So it's a lot of crossover season right now. I think I'm trying to plead with my body to just kind of, to stay up, to stay energized over these next couple of weeks to just close out football season. But it feels like it's been a long season. It certainly has. We're around past the midway point at this point now in the college football season. So so much going on, but happy to be here sitting with you guys for another great episode.
Yeah, 8 weeks in, 7 games down for Tennessee. We're in the thick of it. How about the Liberty going down last night? Did y'all catch the Liberty game with the Caden Salter? Playoff hopes dashed by Kennesaw State. Winless Kennesaw State Owls beat undefeated Liberty. It's the first time that's happened in, I believe, 23 years where a team at least 0-5 beat a team that's at least 5-0. And it was 0-6 versus 5-0. Crazy game on Tuesday night.
Who's the coach there at Liberty? Is that Jamie Chadwell?
The coastal guy. Yeah, Chadwell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There you go. That was crazy. Caden Salter, obviously a former Tennessee guy for a cup of coffee in Knoxville. He's also a Texas boy that I remember from the recruiting scene as well. But boy,
yeah, wild Tuesday nighter.
We had somebody in our Rocky Top Insider group text. He mentioned to us that there was something kind of crazy going on with the Liberty game. I don't know about you guys. I never checked it out. I kind of figured that something might work itself out. So Jack saying this here on Thursday morning is the first inkling that I've had of what happened last night. But hey, it's college football for you.
Hey, some real G5 storylines this week. That happening and Boise UNLV Friday night. So a lot of playoff implications this week in the G5. Another game that had playoff implications was, of course, Alabama at Tennessee last weekend. Not really an elimination game, but kind of close to it. Makes Alabama's path to the playoff with that loss a lot more narrow now. Tide need to win out. And Tennessee keeps their head above water. As long as Tennessee goes 10-2, I think they're probably playoff bound. But Rick, I'll start with you. Tennessee, big win over Alabama. We had our doubts about the Vols going into this one. I know Ryan and I picked Alabama to win. Not confidently, I wouldn't say, but just given the flaws Tennessee had offensively, it was hard to back the Vols. But once again, the Vols defense comes up huge, not allowing 20 points yet again. And Nico found his groove a little bit in the second half, made some key throws. Tennessee leaned on Dylan Sampson once again, who's the best back in the SEC. Tennessee finds a way against Alabama, and defense dominates as once again the storyline here for me.
Defense was dominating as they again are the backbone, are the engine of this Tennessee football team. Tennessee's defense is the unit that's allowed them to stay in games over the last couple of weeks, to be able to make the second half competitive, or at least to be able to give your offense a chance, even though it's kind of continue to sputter in the first couple frames each week. But I don't know, man, when I go back to last week and just think about the sort of broad picture of it, it's funny. This is a game that I picked Tennessee to lose before the season, but then before the game, I picked Tennessee to win. And a lot of that was just because how bad Alabama was faltering over the last couple of weeks. I sat there watching that game, and certainly I would imagine that you guys did as well. And that is just a completely different Alabama team than anything that we've been used to. All right. And I'm not even talking about the some of the storylines that have come up after the game with Ryan Williams and the orange fingernails and stuff like that. I'm talking about stuff during the game and before the game. I'm talking about a cigar in the mouth of an assistant coach walking into the stadium. I'm talking about the double jump shot right during the fourth down play.
So weird.
Again, I know I'm not leading with Tennessee here. I guess that's probably a sin on a Tennessee podcast, but there were so many moments in that game where I just couldn't fathom how different this Alabama team was. Did you guys notice the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would say, which was one of my biggest takeaways in hindsight, was just like how much better Tennessee was on the line of scrimmage. And I know that's not necessarily exactly what you're getting at, but
no,
Alabama's been so good there for so many years, and just for a long, long time they're just going to win every game because they're so much better on the line of scrimmage. And what Tennessee ended up running for, I think, like 175 yards more in this game. I think something in that range. And Tennessee was able to get pressure on Jalen Milroe. They didn't just dominate in a pass rush standpoint, but still were able to affect him some. And then on the flip side, it's not like Nico Iamaleava had clean pockets to throw in all night. But given how bad Tennessee's pass protection has been, I mean, that was definitely the best it's been in SEC play. I would say. Honestly, not that much worse than it was against NC State. So I'd say that aspect was one of my, a day later, 24 hours later, something I was really thinking about. And it goes right to your point, Rick, of just not being what you're used to seeing from Alabama.
Yeah, it just feels like undisciplined football at times. And, that lies on coaching. I think coaching is a problem on this team, and it's preventing them from being great because it feels like Alabama has the personnel to be great, especially offensively, of course. But I don't know. Yeah, they have problems, and Tennessee exposed some of those. And when it's you're not going to win many games when your only game plan is one guy offensively. Is just to throw to one person, and you're playing against one of the best defenses in the country. It's just not going to work.
Top quarterbacks in the country at that as well. I mean, it's not even a great matchup for Ryan Williams, who you're alluding to there. It's like, I know that Jermod McCoy wasn't on him the entire game, but like it's a pretty tough matchup that you've now got to try and go and take advantage of, or try to go and find an advantage with.
Yeah, Ryan, that kind of leads me to Jermod McCoy, who I wanted to talk about today, just how good he's been for Tennessee this season. And, it felt like anytime Ryan Williams made a play last Saturday, it was in zone coverage and he found a hole, or it was on Ricky Gibson. Jermod McCoy, anytime it was 1v1 with them two, it felt like McCoy got the best of Ryan Williams. And, of course, pick in the end zone, which was a huge play. So, Jermod McCoy, you were high on him before the season, Ryan, the Oregon State transfer, but I don't think that anyone expected how truly dominant McCoy's been, and the fact that he's been one of the best corners for Tennessee football in quite some time.
Yeah, I know for sure. He's just like a very complete player. I mean, he's a big physical guy. He's extremely good in the run game. Good at tackling when in zone coverage or man when passes are completed in front of him. He's been very solid tackling, and then just the coverage skills are so strong. Again, hardly. I mean, he gave up the 2 deep balls against Arkansas. Excuse me. Good coverage on both of those. Just better throw on the outside shoulder. Great catches to Andrew Armstrong. So I didn't really think of a play down the field where he hasn't had good coverage all season. And even the shorter stuff, he's just been consistently good in. I'd argue, I guess you'd have to say the play, the end zone pick was his biggest play of the season now, but I would say probably his next 2 biggest are the short plays on 4th down against Oklahoma on the first drive, and then against Florida, whatever that was, early 4th quarter, maybe late 3rd quarter, where a quick slant and then I think it was kind of a curl route on 4th down plays that he's right up there and making the play. And yeah, when you talk about best corners for Tennessee in a while, best defensive backs even, I would say. You go back to Eric Berry, he would be the obvious one that he's not better than. Cam Sutton's the only other one that really comes to mind that was playing at a similar level. Certainly Kamal Hadden played well last year, but shorter season with the injury. McCoy's so much better against a run and playing in physicality than Hadden was a really good cover guy, but not a ton other than that. And maybe a Nigel Warrior had a good season at safety in 2019. and you maybe have a few instances of that here or there with a singular good season. But he's just been so consistent. And I think, I talk about one season, that's not to get too far ahead of ourselves. That's the exciting thing if you're Tennessee, is he's back again next year. And he's a guy that I'd have a hard time thinking is not going to be a first-round pick in the 26 NFL draft.
Yeah, Rick, I mean, you talk about this defense. We knew the D-line was great, but it's guys like Jermod McCoy, being at the top of the list that make this Tennessee defense whole and really dominant front to back moving forward.
Yeah, Jack, what I think is so dangerous about where this Tennessee defense is right now is they've got a couple different ways to shorten or to shrink the field on you to where, the offense is capable of working with. First off, you've got that pass rush, and depending on what Tennessee wants to do with that pass rush, maybe they're bringing 4, maybe they're bringing 5, maybe they're bringing somebody off of an edge or through the middle. They're going to create a little bit of pressure right now to change the layout of the field, to change where you can go with the ball. There's still going to be options, but they're going to alter that a little bit. Then you add a guy like Jermod McCoy on, the side of the secondary for Tennessee, and now you're changing where the offense can go even again, because he is such a talented cornerback for Tennessee and what he can do. He's a legitimate SEC type of guy. He's a legitimate threat who can go up against somebody's best receiver. That's a luxury that Tennessee has not had in the last couple of years, but that's a difference maker when it comes to, hey, you've got a nice defense. You've got a middle of the defense with the linebacker units who have played all right this season. However, they've lost their captain in the middle of the field. How about this guy, Jermod McCoy, being on the right side of being on the side of the secondary, what he can do to change the layout of the field, to change what opposing offenses can do with the ball. I think he's been phenomenal for Tennessee, and again, is giving Tennessee a tremendous piece to work with that is, again, frustrating opposing offenses. So Tennessee's got offensive problems of their own. I'm sure we're going to hit that soon. But Jermod McCoy has truly been a standout, a terrific transfer player for Tennessee. And like Ryan said, and credit to Ryan, this is something I think he was harping on back in December when Jermod McCoy did announce Tennessee from the transfer portal. This is a guy that Tennessee's going to have for multiple years if everything works out well. So certainly just, it's funny. 2 weeks ago after the Florida game, a lot of people in our YouTube comment section, they wanted the media to be asking more and more and more questions for Jermod McCoy. I'm sure that's going to happen down the road at some point, but he's certainly worthy of being talked about as much as we can because he's been that lights out for Tennessee so far this year.
Well, another player that has been lights out, especially as of late, is James Pearce Jr. Little bit of a quiet start to the season, but still making an impact in the pressure game. Now the stats are starting to pile up for the future top 10 overall pick. James Pearce, he's been great, and he was great against Alabama. The stats speak for themselves. 22.2% pressure rate against FBS opponents. That's the best in the FCC. In 4 conference games, Pearce has 4 sacks, 21 tackles, 25 quarterback pressures, and a PBU for what it's worth. And he ranks first amongst edge rushers nationally with 31 total pressures. So we're still talking about a guy that is dominating atop the sport, James Pearce, despite a slow start, Ryan. And number 27 is back to wrecking back offensive backfields. And, he looks all the way back and like he's going to dominate the rest of the season.
Yeah, he does. And, you mentioned the pressure rate, 22.2% being tops in the SEC. Second in the SEC is Oklahoma, R. Mason Thomas. Actually, the Oklahoma's 2 pass rushers are 2 and 3. But Thomas has a 16.5% pressure rate. So you see, that's a big drop off. And then I think 6th place was Dylan Stewart. He had a 14.8. So it's James Pearce by a wide margin in right now in those categories. And he's just been really, really solid. And even I still wouldn't say like a lead against the run, but better against the run this season. Like I think there's been definite growth there. I'll give him more credit for the play last week that maybe I should have given him more credit for. To strip at Florida too was a huge play, and obviously a play in the run game. So he's been really solid, or really good, more than solid. And it's kind of what I said at the time of he wasn't playing a ton of snaps in those games early in the season. And it didn't really matter as much. The games he was going to be judged by, the games that Tennessee needed him to take over or have a huge impact, were these games the last couple of weeks, and he's done that, and the games going forward too. So, one thing I will pose to y'all, it's a tough one. I should have had the replay synced up and us ready to show on the podcast. There's a great debate right now amongst the statisticians I pronounced that right? Yeah, I think so.
Yes, statisticians.
Yes.
Sure.
Over how many sacks James Pearce has? You said 4, Jack. PFF has him at 4. ESPN, and I would assume Tennessee, because I think, let me look right here. I can look on Stat Broadcast to have it pulled up. I believe they have him at 3.5 because the play that he had late in the game, 3.5. The sack where he kind of was a little bit offsides.
Yeah.
Oh,
Stat Broadcast and ESPN, because I think ESPN just pulls their stats from Stat Broadcast, gave him half a sack on that play with Jeremiah Thielander. Again, should have had this play so y'all could watch it. I'm with PFF. I think Thielander was like kind of there and kind of pushed him down as he was already falling, but Pearce got him by the legs and he was already going down. I'm with PFF. I think Pearce should have had the full sack on that one.
Yeah, he kind of gets him from the back. I remember that. I remember Pearce in that play and Pearce only. So without seeing the play again, just instinctively right now, I'd say it should be a solo.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, when I worked for Russell Smith, he always said that he would go by whichever recruiting organization had the highest number of stars when talking about a recruit. I'm going to go with whichever publication has the highest number of sacks, considering one of my bold predictions for the year was that James Pearce Jr. might possibly set Tennessee's all-time sack record. So I just need to go with whoever's got the most for that. But no, I'd agree with you guys. And I think that was a James Pearce sack. He set it up. He got it to where it needed to be. Jeremiah Thielander might have come and finished things off and closed down shop with alongside Pearce. But I think you give Pearce a ton of credit for that play just because of how incredibly he jumped off the line. I think McElroy said it during the broadcast. If you're a fan of Alabama, you want a penalty. If you're a fan of Tennessee, you think it's good, right? If you call it as a penalty, you can justify it. If you don't call it as a penalty, you can justify that as well. So what a crazy play that was. But yeah, I'm gonna give it to Pearce as well.
Something funny about that play. Bama fans livid at GMAC for
I'm sure
not saying. Fair. I thought it was a pretty clear penalty.
Same. It's like I get like honestly, shout out to McElroy for doing his best to not come off as biased, but like that's not a judgment call. You're either offsides or you're not, and he was offsides. No, it wasn't like just unbelievable offsides. That wasn't the worst call I've ever seen missed, but he was offsides, and it's not a judgment call. You're offsides or you're not.
Those are always bang, and with how fast Pearce is, it's hard to get those sometimes. But what McElroy said verbatim was, that's one you can leave in your pocket. And that's the quote. Yeah. So many Alabama fans were mad at. And then you look, and so many Tennessee fans are mad at Greg for a biased call. But I'm like, this is one of the biggest moments in the game, and he's calling it down the line. I listened to the front call start to finish. I thought he was really down the middle. I thought he did a great job, but we'll see. Of course, both fan bases are mad, though. You can't win in that scenario. Bama fans think you're not biased enough. Tennessee fans just going to say you're biased. So it was – I thought the call was good, though. I'm just going to say. Let's move to the other side of the ball. Tennessee's offense has lived and died with Dylan Sampson all year. We know that, and that's how they've won games. But down the stretch, Nico made some throws, found a little bit of a rhythm. Wasn't good first half. I mean, obviously the interception was bad. Got hurt a little bit. Gassmore comes in, throws a pick, yeeting it down the field. But Nico Iamaleava found a little bit of a rhythm in the second half. The throw to Chris Brazell was beautiful. And he made some nice plays, Ryan. And I'm wondering your thoughts on if Nico maybe turned a corner here in the second half, and if your expectations for Nico have changed a little bit moving forward, given what he showed in the last 30 minutes here against Alabama.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure my expectations have really changed. Because you got to think about it. I mean, maybe where they were at halftime, like the first half was so bad that maybe it raises it up for what he did in the second half. To me, it's just kind of it's more just wait and see. I'm in wait and see mode on it. I definitely a really good sign. Definitely played better. But it wasn't like it was so good that it's just like, all right, he's clearly turned the corner. Or like a clear thing, off of the injury of like, oh, I just sparked him to life. And he was great from there because he did throw a bad interception on the very next drive. So definitely a really good sign. To me, I think the observation I've had, especially watching the game afterwards, and you kind of had this a little bit at the time, it's the real open ones that he's struggling on. Like, even in the second half, made 2 really good throws to Squirrel White down the field and Chris Brazzell down the field that were not caught. And they were open, but like coverage was pretty good on those plays. They weren't awful coverage. And those were the really good ones. And it felt like the wide open ones were the ones that he's just struggling with right now. I don't know if he's in his head on them or it's something mentally. Even because, and again, it's even in the second half. Obviously, Mordo's misses in the first half. But the ball of Brew McCoy down the seam, I guess that would have been early fourth quarter because Tennessee was going to the north end zone. I mean, he's really open. He just sails that throw. Honestly, like a pretty similar. Now he doesn't have the speed that Jalen Hyatt has, so I don't think it would have been a touchdown. But honestly, a pretty similar play that Hooker hit to Hyatt down the seam, and I guess it would have been the third quarter. No, I guess it would have been the fourth quarter in 2022, headed to the south end zone. So, wait and see mode, and it wasn't the interesting observation for me. It's just that it continues to feel like when the coverage is a little bit better or a little bit tighter, he's more accurate throwing the ball down the field as opposed to when it's wide open. It feels like he's in his head a little bit right now.
And when his feet maybe aren't set, like when he's a little bit on the move, he's better somehow. But Rick, your thoughts on Nico and how his finish in this game maybe change your outlook on him?
Yeah, which first, before I say this, I've got a pup that's kind of running around and all my cords over here. So if something gets unplugged, I apologize in the moment. We'll figure it out as we go. I think that Ryan makes a great point right there. The issue with that game, though, is that it was a juxtaposition of 2 halves, right? You can talk about the encouraging signs from the second half for Nico and this Tennessee offense, but you do still have that first half in your immediate memory of saying, hey, but that was a really bad first quarter, and that was a really tough first half for Tennessee's offense. They couldn't get anything going. So, yes, I think it's absolutely encouraging that Tennessee's offense was able to find those 24 points in the second half. I think a lot of it was just that they were able to be resilient enough to win. They needed a score to win that game. They were trailing at halftime. Yes, Tennessee's defense was keeping them in for the final 2 frames, but Tennessee's offense needed a score to win that game. They were able to. So I think that is encouraging. But to me, I still look at this and say, okay, but that's kind of it's been a little bit more of the trend, right? Tennessee can find their footing a little bit better in the second half. I still think there's an important quality for this team of being able to translate that to the first half as well. Being able to get off to the fast start that Josh Heupel certainly wants to, that this offense certainly wants to. I get that that's not always going to be the case every time. A lot of it is going to be dependent on the other team or the scheme or the matchups or just your own personnel or what you're doing. So I still think there's an element to Tennessee needs to play a little bit faster and certainly wants to get off to a faster start. That to me is still a concern moving forward to some pretty big games coming up, in the back half of the season, including a potential playoff push. But I do think that it is encouraging that he was able to put some of those mistakes to the side, put some of that those nerves to the side, be able to come back for the second half and win a rivalry game, one that did have the pressure of a big game, one that you did have to make a bit of a comeback to go. And I know that a lot of that was on Dylan Sampson's shoulders. He continues to prove that he's one of the best running backs in the entire country, not just the SEC. So I guess my point kind of wraps up to, yes, it was encouraging that the offense was able to find their footing a lot more in the second half, but I still think that Tennessee needs to find those improvements to make it happen. So they're not just, they're not looking at a 4th straight game with 0 first half points. I want to see them try to find that fast start a little bit better than they have in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, let's put a number on it, Ryan. Scale of 1 to 10, how much did your opinion or I keep saying outlook, but confidence in Tennessee's offense to play a 60-minute ball game on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did that confidence improve after the Alabama game? If that question makes sense.
What would be like stay the same?
Stay the same would be, I guess, because yeah, sure,
like a 4 maybe, I guess, from that.
A little bit, but not much.
Yeah, like some for sure. It wasn't like just barely, because I think again it just is a continuation. Honestly, these last 3 games where Tennessee hasn't scored in the first half. Also, how funny is it that Tennessee is not going to score a single first half point in the month of October?
Yeah,
and they're going to leave October 7-1 with wins over Alabama and Florida.
That is
but
crazy.
it's a continuation. Arkansas, it didn't feel like there was anything there in the first half. Like, they were largely lifeless. Florida game is like, just here or there. Like, a couple mistakes here, a couple pass plays you're close on hitting on. The Alabama game was like, you know, replayed that game with like everything being what it was. And if Tennessee scored 27 points in the first half, I was like, I wouldn't. They could have scored 27 points given how they moved the ball and the plays that they had open down the field and the kicks that they missed. So there is confidence in that. There's confidence in, all right, Tennessee's starting to get guys more open. I think there's also some concern in what that, you know, if you're Alabama, like I think I minimized Alabama's defensive concerns heading into that game. I think more than anything of where I was off on the game was Alabama's defense was worse than I thought. And kind of to that same point, not to ramble too much, like Alabama shut out Tennessee in the first half. Was there a single Alabama fan that was like, oh, wow, I feel a lot better about our defense? That we really came to play?
Yeah, I don't think so. If they did, they're delusional, no doubt about it. But Rick, what about you? Where are you at on this scale? With one being your confidence level in Tennessee's offense to play 60 minutes is the same, whereas 10, you're like, oh, this is going to be a juggernaut rest of season.
I would agree. I'd say a 2 or a 3, maybe a little bit more, because and that's not to say that I think that Tennessee's offense has had a 1 out of a scale from 1 to 10. Just how much did my change 1 to 10? It didn't change too much. I mean, Tennessee. Your question was, how much more confidence do you have now that Tennessee can play a 60-minute game on offense? Well, in some ways they didn't, right? It wasn't like we now have an exact example of Tennessee being able to produce in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. However, that being said, and I know there's a lot of people probably screaming at their computer or their radio right now. That being said, though, to Ryan's credit, they did get guys open at a better clip. They did get guys down the field more often. There was a time where Ryan and I and our good friend Ben McKee, who we all sit next to each other in the box, there was a good time where we all looked at each other and we were like, is there not 21 points on the board that Tennessee has left on the field? Or is there not 21 points that Tennessee has left on the field? I think it was the beginning of the second quarter. Like, there were still 7 or 8 minutes to go until halftime. So on one hand, I get to this feeling of, okay, well, they showed some better signs of life. They showed the ability to maybe still get those guys wide open. They've just got to connect on them. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, they didn't connect on them, right? They didn't prove that they could be able to go do that and do it fast. Now, they did get things going together for the second half, and I think that is really impressive. I think that is really encouraging going forward. But I don't have it in me to raise that number much more than 2, 3, 4 range, simply because they didn't do it, even though the signs were there to be able to. So once again, two big opportunities to do that against Kentucky and Mississippi State in the next couple of weeks. Got to maybe take advantage of those opportunities. Maybe that'll help my confidence degree go up. But I don't know. I can't move it too much right now up because 0 points at halftime. You can get things going, but if you still 0 on at the 0 at the break, I think you've got to take that into consideration a pretty good amount.
All right, I think it's all a consensus here. I agree with you guys. Round of 4. You have to be a little bit more optimistic, but given the first half struggles, it's hard to say those are completely going to go away. We're going to wrap up here, a little bit of a shorter pod today, just looking at the rest of the season with the schedule. Ryan, I'll start with you. I said it before we started recording here. 10-2 is staring Tennessee in the face, and 10-2 in all likelihood is going to be a college football playoff berth. Tennessee gets home games against Kentucky and Mississippi State following the bye. Kentucky isn't great. Mississippi State isn't good at all. So I think Tennessee should win both of those games. I'll give State a little bit of credit. Offense has been better as of late with the quarterback change. But still, Tennessee should take care of business in both of those two. The road game at Georgia is going to be tough, especially if the Bulldogs defense is turning back the clock to 21 like they did against Texas. And then the season ends with an intriguing road trip over to Nashville against Vanderbilt, which I think would be the one you'd circle as an upset spot, Ryan. So where are you at with the rest of the schedule here for Tennessee?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said. I think it's setting up for Tennessee to be 9-2 heading into Vanderbilt. And I think by no means is that a layover easy win. And I think I've said it on here before that Vanderbilt's got a good offense, and Tennessee's defense continues to be really stout. But I think anybody that can push and potentially score 24 points against Tennessee makes you feel a little bit nervous about any sort of game. And certainly Tennessee, it won't be some big hostile road environment, so I don't think you worry about a lot of the usual road concerns in that game. But I think that's going to be a challenging game, and I think it's almost, the standpoint of, and I do think almost certainly 10-2 gets them in. I do think you continue to monitor needing to play well in the Georgia game, even if you lose, which I think you have to have a lot of confidence in that. The way Tennessee's defense is playing and the way Georgia's offense is playing, that Tennessee's not going to get blown out in that game. But also wanting, whether it be Arkansas from earlier in the season or Vanderbilt, who are going to get late in the season, to keep on picking up some wins, just to have a couple more, their loss look a little bit more quality. And another win to potentially go along with Alabama. It looks like a quality win, because right now, just a lot of these wins are not, or potential wins too, with Kentucky and Mississippi State. So I'm with you. Kentucky, I just don't think they have enough offense to potentially beat Tennessee, and certainly, even though Mississippi State's playing better, shout out to Van Buren boys. It's hard to see that game really changing a ton.
Ryan, just real quick, in the past, Tennessee fans have, designed concepts to checker First Bank Stadium in Nashville. That's Vanderbilt's football stadium. They've had designs and plans and little Twitter ideas of going and taking over the stadium or doing an orange out or something like that. You've been around Vanderbilt fans certainly a little bit more than I have in my life. I mean, is that a situation where if you get to the end of the season, Tennessee is 10-2, Vanderbilt understands that they might have a chance to blow up Tennessee's playoff push? Do you see them, packing that stadium a little bit more than normal? Do you see that environment becoming a little bit better than it normally would be? Or is that still a situation where, hey, it's Vanderbilt, they've only got X amount of people who typically go to the games anyways? It's also the Tennessee game where a lot of in-state people are coming in. Do you see that environment getting raised for any particular reason if Vanderbilt has a chance to, play spoiler and cut down Tennessee's season at the very last second?
Maybe less dramatic than it's been in the past. Maybe 65-35 or 70-30 instead of like 80-20.
Sure.
But I don't see any sort of huge change. And I'll tell you the thing that could end up biting Vanderbilt a little bit. I'm trying to remember all the exact details. And granted, I do think they were still pretty expensive, but they sold single game tickets before the year. And I know a lot of Tennessee fans have already hopped on that. So we're I think now the secondary market might be really expensive for a lot of reasons, both the Tennessee aspect and also Vanderbilt fans maybe being more inclined to just to hold on to their tickets and go to the game unless they get a ton of money. I do think, and again, I think they were expensive. I think they were very much banking on trying to make a lot of money on Tennessee and Alabama fans this year, buying tickets, single game tickets. But I still expect Tennessee to have a decent fair share more fans at that game than Vanderbilt.
Rick, any final thoughts here on the schedule before we wrap?
Yeah, I think for Tennessee, it's just about continuing to handle business. And handling business does not necessarily mean that you're going to close out the season with a perfect undefeated record, but it means taking care of the things you need to do in order to put yourself in a position to be in the conversation at the end of the year. You guys talked about it a minute ago. I think that 10-2 gets you in that conversation, and I think it very much more than likely puts you into the playoffs. However, there are there are experts out there, there are analysts out there right now who are projecting that Tennessee might miss the cut at 10-2. So I think the big thing for the Vols is you got to put all that stuff to the side. You got to put everything, all the outside noise, all the midseason hype, all the playoff projections, you got to put it to the side and say, we just got to go out there and handle our business. Because as we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, Tennessee lost any wiggle room they might have had with the Arkansas loss. Now, beating Alabama was great. Beating Alabama got you in the right direction, but you still got to go out there and handle business against Kentucky, against Mississippi State. You're going to go on the road to Georgia. That's going to be a big one. But then you got to come home and handle business against UTEP, and then we just talked about the Vanderbilt game as well. So I think that 10-2 is on the table for Tennessee. I think that's where the expectation is. I think that's a tough ask to go to Athens and win that game, especially when Georgia doesn't have a lot of great home games this year. They're going to be all in on that game coming up on November 16th. So I think everything is in view for Tennessee. It's all in the frame, but Tennessee's got to go out there and handle business the right way. Josh Heupel talked he talked on Wednesday about having a little bit better of an off week. I think that was certainly a talking point coming out of the, coming out of the Oklahoma game, going into the Arkansas game. You had a huge week and then a bye week and then a little bit of a sneaky team right there. Tennessee doesn't have to go on the road for that sneaky team, but it's a little bit of a similar situation. You had a huge win against Alabama, very emotional win, bye week, and then a tricky little SEC game with Kentucky. So I think that's something to note for, but I think that Tennessee is going to be very much ready to play. Dark mode uniforms, night game. Dark mode not announced yet, but expected, I would say. So a lot of good stuff coming up, but a lot of big football coming up.
Absolutely. Tennessee in the thick of the playoff race. Got to take care of business in Neyland Stadium in the next 2 weeks after this weekend, of course, as it's Tennessee's second and final open date. Rick,
hey, by the way, we did hear confirmation yesterday at UT that and this is something that I think a lot of people already knew, especially if you have one of those front row seats at Neyland Stadium. But we did get a little bit of confirmation that the speakers that are used on the sideline, because Ryan mentioned at the top of the show the big Chris Stewart story. Those are for background music and the PA announcer and the band and things like that. It's not crowd noise, but I've loved the way that this story has blown up here in the last couple of days. It's a perfect bye week kind of story, but I will say, just from my own experience being down there on the field, I can really only think of maybe one specific moment where I felt like Neyland Stadium was louder, and that was when Chase McGrath's field goal went through in 2022. And then an Oklahoma game in 2015, I remember being super loud, but I don't remember a specific point in the game like I remember Alabama's 4th and 22 from just a couple of days ago. So I think the stadium was one of the true loudest environments that I've ever heard, and I've been going to games for a good 10 years there fairly consistently. So at least in that little modern time frame, that Neyland Stadium was one of the loudest I've ever heard it, and certainly more than other stadiums.
Yeah, that's what a lot have been saying, how this Bama game was just on a different level a little bit with the loudness in Neyland. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. You can follow Ryan Schumpert at rshump00 on socials. That's SCHUMP. You can follow Rick at Ric Butler on Twitter. You can also give me a follow at Jack Foster Media, and follow at Rocky Top Insider, of course, to stay up to date on all Tennessee coverage needs, and also over at RockyTopInsider.com. If you're watching, like and subscribe on our channel. Leave a comment if you want. If you're listening, we appreciate you listening wherever you find your podcast. But for Ryan and Rick, I'm Jack. We'll see you next time.